last time this ran, and it went really well. I think something to remind the people participating as panel members is that although our discussion room may not be very large, it is being recorded to the best of my knowledge, and that the information that you share here, even if our audience is not very large at the moment, is available for students to gain insight into what it's like to participate in research as an undergraduate. And all of you have been highly recommended by the faculty members who've worked with you. It's my delight to get to know you a little bit on this panel. I won't spend most of the time talking. As I shared with you, the questions I have are fairly introductory to research. So I'd like you, when I go around, I'm going to just call on names in the order that I see you on my screen. So I don't think you'll necessarily know, but if you need a moment or need to ask to pass, feel free, I'll move on to the next person. I think the goal of this panel is to share your personal experience engaging in research as an undergraduate student, in particular, sharing that perspective. When you introduce yourself, I'd like you to say your name, say what your program or concentration area is, what the area of research is that you'd like to highlight. So if you've been part of maybe 4 or 5, maybe just select 1 or 2 that you're going to highlight. And we'll go around and have people do introductions that way. And then I'll go around again with another set of questions related to how did you become involved in research? Because I think for the students and families who are listening in, research may not be something they've actively participated in very much. And so we want people to understand how you arrived to where you were able to get exposure to what research is like. And then given the size of our panel, if we have time, we'll go into what it's like to do that research, what your daily, weekly sort of routines were and how that fit in with being a student. But again, given the size, I'll try to gauge how many responses we can take. Probably for after the first 2 rounds of questions, we may not be able to take responses from everyone for each question. Before I begin though, anybody on the panel have a question for me directly? And shake your head no if you're on mute. So, okay, then I'm going to start at who I see first, which is Connor Williams. And so if you can introduce yourself, say your program, and then what area of research you are going to reflect on as an undergraduate.
Sure. I'm Connor Williams. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, senior civil engineering major, math minor, and area of research I focused in was with Dr. Didi Bhaskar, and we did urban hydrology.
Great, that was perfect. Thank you, Connor. Next up, Florencio, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Florencio. I'm a 3rd year environmental engineering student I was originally born in Trinidad, Colorado, or not born, raised in Trinidad, Colorado. And right now I work under Dr. Carter in for an indoor environmental quality study.
Perfect. Thank you, Florencio. Dixie, can you go next?
Hi, my name is Dixie. I'm in my 4th and final year as an undergraduate civil engineering major. Along with the area I am very interested in is water resources. So along with that, I also picked up the sustainable water minor. And the research experience I'll be talking about will be with my research internship at the Colorado Stormwater Center here at CSU. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Dixie. Next up would be Albert.
Hi, everyone. My name is Albert. I'm from Aspen, Colorado. I'm in my 3rd year as a civil engineering major. My research focus is under the direction of Dr. Ryan Morrison, and it mostly focuses on hydrology and hydrological engineering, specifically on repairing effects for water balances along river basins.
Awesome. I am loving hearing the topics that everyone's working on. So next up on my screen is Roni. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Roni. I was born in Denver and raised in El Paso, Texas. I'm a 2nd year civil engineering student, and I've been researching with Dr. Ti-Cheng Tong, anti-scaling mechanisms in water treatment.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roni. Okay, CJ, I see you next on my screen.
Hi, I'm CJ Sheeman. I'm currently a master's student in the Hydrologic Science and Engineering program. A lot of my research has been involved in E. coli monitoring in various creeks and rivers on the Front Range. And that data is currently being used to inform regulatory decisions at the state level.
Fantastic. This is such a great spread. Thank you very much for introducing yourselves. I think that covers everyone on this panel. And so the next round of questions that I want to make sure everyone is able to share is, I'd like you to in, let's see, probably, a couple of minutes, maybe 2 to 3 minutes, share what motivated your interest in research involvement initially, and then what was your pathway to getting an opportunity at research? And so just to model what I'm looking for, I'm going to share actually my own experience really briefly. So when I was an undergraduate, I was studying biology and Spanish. And I was really interested in getting involved in research in general because it sounded like a fascinating space to work in. Based on books I had read, I was interested in people that studied ecological phenomena and the opportunity to work in the field. So I didn't really have a strong interest in a particular topic. I was mostly looking for a laboratory that would allow me to gain some insight into what the research process is like. So I expressed my interest to several faculty members that I took classes with and performed well in their class. And when a research enrichment opportunity came up for the summer, which is funded through an NSF program, they asked if I was interested and I applied. So my first 2 summers of research were just working in very different labs doing pretty repetitive tasks, but I had a lot of autonomy over that small portion of data collection. And from there, I continued to express my interest in research and got connected to different labs and worked in those throughout my undergraduate career. So I'm sort of looking from each of you to say a little bit about, why were you interested in research in the first place? And then how did you get connected to one of your first several opportunities? So I'm going to go in a slightly different order. I'll just go in reverse here. So CJ, I'm going to start with you if that's okay. I don't know if I gave you enough time. I can talk a little more if you need a few minutes.
Yeah, that's okay. So I was primarily interested in undergraduate research for the purpose of gaining experience in my field to become a more marketable job applicant. I also was just really interested in the field that I had chosen, so I was excited to get involved. And my opportunity just arose in class one day by word of mouth from the faculty member that was my instructor at the time.
Thank you. That was perfect, CJ. Next, we're going to ask Roni. Can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to seek a research opportunity and how you nabbed your first one? Say.
Yeah, so initially I didn't actually have much interest in doing research. But I learned about the SURE program, which is, I believe, for first generation and honors students. And after hearing about that, I figured I would just apply to it and get some experience and try to build up my resume a little bit. And yeah, after doing that, I actually got connected with Dr. Tong, who I'm working with now. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how I got into it.
No, that's fantastic. I actually really appreciate, I think, my hope is that the members of this panel reflect sort of different pathways. Sometimes we start out in something without really knowing why we might want to do it. It's just gaining exposure to a different dimension of what it's like to be in a university setting and the opportunities that we have here. And I do want to just take the moment. I know a few of you might also have been part of this program, but the SURE program that was referenced, for those that will be listening in later, is the Scott Undergraduate Research Experience Fellowship. It is targeted at first year students, especially those that maybe haven't had prior experience in college or in research. So that's a program that was inaugural when Florencio actually joined that program as well. I think that was 2018 or 2019. I'm not sure. It's a relatively new program, but it's persisted because I think it's been pretty successful. So I'm glad you mentioned it. All right, I don't want to cut into other people's time. So Albert, you'll be up next.
Yeah, so the reasons why I chose to participate in research were mainly for 2 distinct reasons. One was to gain exposure and experience. As a freshman, I was itching to actually figure out what engineering entailed, and I really wanted to really feel get a feel for all the things research had to offer. And the second reason was because I have a dream of becoming a professor one day and learned that the research route in academia is a good pathway for that. So I wanted to get some exposure into that field. And the way I got involved with research was also through the SURE program.
Fantastic. No, I'm so glad to hear your perspective as well. It's a little different from the last two. So Dixie, I think you'll be up next if you can share.
Absolutely. So before I talk about how I came into my research internship, I think it's very important to share that I spent the first couple years of my undergrad being exposed to first a private consulting firm, and then on the other side of that, working with a public water municipality, so more of the government side. So I started volunteering to help out with some research activities with a friend who was currently hired then as a research intern. And I thought it would be a great way to kind of round out my perspective between private consulting, working for the government, and working on the research side of things. And next thing I knew, I was learning how to weld a weir box, calibrate a weir box, use a plasma cutter, helping with E. coli sampling in the pooter, checking E. coli database data before submitting to the state, to CDPHE. And eventually, after volunteering for a while, I was asked, do you want to get paid for this? And that was my first summer staying in Fort Collins for a paid research internship. And here I am. So
Awesome. Thank you for the additional context too. I think that is incredibly helpful to share, not just with me. I'm excited to hear about your path, but also those that are listening in. So thank you, Dixie. The next person would be Florencio. Can you share how you got involved and what motivated you?
Sure. I guess first semester of freshman year, I really wanted to get experience or just exposure to the different areas that environmental engineers kind of work in. Because it's kind of hard to get that exposure from the classes that we were taking, since they were all basic math and science. And fortunately, I got that email saying that, hey, we're starting this new program called the Undergraduate Research Experience. And I knew it was like right away when I saw it, I was immediately interested. And I guess coming in to see college, I knew I wanted to work in like a lab, or work with samples and data collection and all that. So that's kind of why here I am today.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm so excited to actually see the impacts of that SURE program. I think this is something we should be sure to share out with, I think, Laurel and some of the others who've organized it. So last up for this question, Connor, could you comment on your motivations and how you got connected to research?
Yeah, sure. So I started my sophomore year in the spring. It's kind of two reasons, similar to a lot of the what a lot of the other people have said. The classes at the time were mostly engineering science and pretty surface level stuff, and I really wanted to learn more about really any discipline within civil engineering, just so I could sort of focus my efforts later on in college into what I want to focus on. So I just wanted more exposure. And then second, I really needed a job at the time. So Dr. Bascard put out a application, or just a request for applications on the CSU listserv email. I saw the email, applied, and just went from there.
Great, thank you for sharing, and to all of you for sharing sort of how you got to where you are, or maybe were at the point of engaging in undergraduate research. I sort of want to just revisit or synthesize before we move on. I hope that those listening in, or those that will listen later, can hear that there are diverse motivations. So as I was hoping might be the case on this panel, we have people that maybe weren't necessarily looking for a research position per se, but we're looking for a way to do paid work and get exposure to engineering research in an applied fashion. a couple of people mentioned the desire to see what engineering looks like. I think it's especially valuable in those first couple of years when a lot of the courses that you're taking are more fundamental, as they should be, and are an important part of the training process. But it can be nice to intersperse exposure to real world research and work in with the fundamentals that you're learning. And sometimes you have the opportunity where those two can meet. I think it's also important to note that especially in engineering disciplines, undergraduate positions can be paid. It doesn't necessarily mean that it'll cover all of your monthly costs associated with living somewhere like Fort Collins. But I know for myself, like Connor mentioned, being able to take, and I think Dixie also mentioned, being able to take a paid undergraduate research position my junior and senior year in undergraduate helped me, pay the rent and stay in the university town rather than going back home. And I felt like that gave me some insights into, what life was like on a college campus outside of the typical academic semester, and gave me some freedom to connect with people that helped me understand jobs and professional paths. So it sounds like some of that experience is also reflected among our panelists. I think we're doing fairly well on time. So for this next question, I'd really like everyone to be able to have an opportunity to answer. It might be the question where we could go the longest. So please just be cognizant. We have 6 members of our panel, and I would still like to get to 1 or 2 more questions afterwards, but I want listeners to get a flavor for the actual work that you're doing. So the kind of research that you're engaged in, each of you represents a different research domain. You work with different professors. And that opportunity sounds like it's given a number of you insight into what it looks like to do engineering work. And so I'd like you to share the overall topic of research that you're doing. Already you touched on that maybe briefly in the first question. And as you answer the question around what's the big question or the big picture that you're working on, if you can also provide some examples of the types of tools and skills that you've used or developed. So Dixie already actually sort of modeled this pretty well when she was mentioning the types of tests that she got to do and reports that she got to write. So I'd like each of you to be able to share a little bit about, what has this research opportunity given you the opportunity to enhance in terms of your toolkit? Other examples might be that you have exposure to a new software program or a new new to you sampling method, or if you've had opportunity to engage with external stakeholders like CDPHE was mentioned, CJ, I believe you mentioned some of the sort of audience for the work that you're doing, and I don't remember it specifically. That's really what I'm trying to get at with this question, so that people can hear how does a research opportunity maybe open up opportunities to learn that aren't as available necessarily through a classroom setting. So hopefully that's clear. And I think I'll go this time. I'm going to pick from the middle. So Albert, I'm going to start with you if you feel ready, and then I'll move on to the next person. But same as before, if you feel like you need a few more minutes, please just ask for a pass. Either I can speak a little bit or I can pass it on to the next person.
Yeah, I'd like to request a pass if that's all right.
Absolutely, no problem. How about this? Does anyone feel ready to volunteer from the panel? Like Connor? All right, thank you. Thanks, Albert, too. I appreciate it. We'll come back to you. Go ahead, Connor.
Okay, so I guess just an overview of what I do. My role as like the research assistant is kind of to act as like an intermediary between just like raw data or database, and then grad students or PhD students or Dr. Basker herself. So just do a lot of data cleaning and tidying up so that they get a product that they could just use, look at, and make observations from, as opposed to having to do all that kind of busy work. So as far as you had mentioned softwares that I've gotten to use, I've done like the majority between ArcGIS and Excel, a lot between those two. And then I just listing off like a few projects that I've worked on. I haven't been focused on one thing in particular because I've helped out grad students, and then, like I said, Dr. Basker with her research. So it's just kind of working lots of little projects. One was checking outflows from wastewater treatment plants that were in watersheds of interest. So one of the grad students had a project involving some watersheds in Denver metro area. So I looked at data from them and saw what they were contributing. One of the ongoing projects we have is monitoring some stream sensors in Denver metro area streams for the Storms project, which is collaboration with Kent State. And I've kind of managed that myself because there's no one grad student on it. Doing oxygen isotope sampling from some streams also in the Denver area. A few others, and then just in general, like a lot of miscellaneous like data compilation from data sets online. Kind of, like I said, going back through, narrowing it down to what they're actually interested in, and then presenting them with that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you sort of reference, each undergraduate research experience can be different, but I think oftentimes, for instance, students that have worked in my group or that I've mentored in the past, like you described, may jump around from a number of different projects because the work that's needed to support the larger effort might be short in duration. And one way to look at that I think is a pretty fair way to look at it is as a beginner in research, it gives you an opportunity to sort of see a range of projects, and also the range of like very hard and often tedious work that goes into leading to a finished product. So I appreciate the answer that you gave. I think it was perfect. I'd like to, just in the interest, cycle back around to Albert to see if you feel ready to respond.
Yeah, I do. And thank
Okay.
you for giving me that time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Connor. All right, Albert, you're up.
So to describe my research, first I'll talk about the purpose, what we're currently doing, and what my role has played into it. So my research is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Colorado Agricultural Experiment Station. And we're focused on understanding the riparian effects of, well, actually, let me rephrase that, the effects of riparian vegetation on irrigation influenced water. So in other terms, we're looking at how plants are affected on the banks of rivers based on the quality of that river flow. And we're currently monitoring this little area in the lower Arkansas River Basin in eastern Colorado. And this project has been happening for the last 2 to 3 years. So I got involved in 2019 in the middle of it. And my role is mostly data management and statistical analysis, looking at what data we've collected from these monitoring stations that we placed in that area and sort of what that means. My other duties include building sensors and little data stations that actually go into those areas. So I do some field work on the side, as well as writing and drafting all observations that we observe based on those analyses. The things me and my grad student, I work alongside a grad student, we're working on now is sort of presenting this research. So we're in the stages of writing the final draft of what this data, what we learned from this data, and then we're hoping to present it at a conference soon. I hope that answers your question, but if there's anything I can expand upon, please let me know.
No, I think that was fabulous. You covered kind of the many stages of the life cycle of research project, from data collection and prepping equipment to managing those data. And it's exciting to hear that you're involved in the drafting of reports for presentations as well. You are reminding me that I should be checking to see if there are any questions in the chat. Not seeing any though. I don't have any further questions at the moment because I think that was a great response. And I'd like to go ahead and pass the mic to Roni, if you feel ready to respond. Thank you, Albert. That was,
sure.
that was great.
So the big idea, basically what I've been doing research on, is looking at water treatment of like something like seawater. And so the way that, or one possible way that you could treat that water is by running it through these like membranes and basically filtering all the sodium out or anything that, can't be consumed. And so one of the problems with that is, in the process, the water gets so concentrated with all these like, I guess, things like dissolved in it. And they can actually collect on the membranes themselves, and they form like the scale over it. and that reduces the efficiency of the whole process. So my research has been focused on finding out how to combat that scaling process and just make the whole thing more efficient. So what I have been doing for my research is just looking at papers online, basically. So I started last spring. So it's pretty much as soon as I started, that's when coronavirus happened. And so that's kind of taken away my opportunity to actually work in the lab so far. So I've just been looking at research papers, helping with writing a published journal article on the subject. And so yeah, I haven't really gotten to experience the full, thing of working in the lab yet, but so far I'd say it's still been great to be able to at least learn about something that I was clueless about before. So yeah, it's been good.
I'm really glad that you can share sort of that other dimension, and I'm guessing Connor and Albert and others that you're all involved in reading literature, but I'm glad you highlighted it because it has been a challenging year for research in many ways, and so getting to see how research programs adapt under the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic, I'm sure has been something that will stick with us all. But having the opportunity or maybe viewing it as an opportunity to read a little bit more deeply and see how the work that you're doing fits in a larger research context that can also have a lot of value. And it's maybe less common in the engineering realms, that at least the ones that I've worked in, but for undergraduates getting started in a research lab, sometimes doing a literature review and participating like a systematic review, or a meta-analysis type gathering of information, that's a formal research process itself, and is one that's good to be exposed to, and I'd say only feels increasingly valuable as a skill set given the proliferation of publication and the need to filter that information and synthesize it into meaningful knowledge. So I'm glad that you highlighted that aspect of research. I'd like to go ahead and move on to Dixie if you feel ready to respond, and then I'll follow with Florencio and then CJ, just so you can be prepared.
Right. So I think I mentioned this earlier. I'm focusing on my research internship at the Colorado Stormwater Center, and just the general mission of the Colorado Stormwater Center, as you may guess from the name, is focusing on stormwater management. Something that I would like to point out to any of our listeners, if you are fortunate enough to live in Fort Collins or come to Fort Collins, you will probably see at some point the effects of storms on Fort Collins, like flooding the streets. And also on campus, there are some water level markers to look out for the Spring Creek flood of 1997. So from that perspective, it's been really cool to encounter these research projects that deal with like stormwater volume reduction and also monitoring water quality. I know I referenced some of the more specific tasks I've helped with before, but everything from going out and just taking soil moisture readings to writing up how to properly wash stormwater sample bottles, like in-house with pictures. All of those steps are very important. And I think Connor mentioned this earlier, that while they seem like little tasks, they can definitely help save time, and you definitely still feel like you're helping out with the project a lot. I hope that answers the question enough.
Very much so. Thank you, Dixie. That was great. And just again, I'll be brief, but I actually appreciate that not just you, but a number of people have mentioned sort of the experience as an undergraduate doing research can sometimes involve quite a lot of tedious tasks. And I can share that my first task was collecting spores off of seed pods, and I did that for 3 months. 8 hours a day, sitting in the same greenhouse, and then looking at them under microscopes and counting them. That work is essential to converting, observations into data that becomes information and becomes knowledge that contributes to a field. And when you're starting out in research, most often your expertise level is low and your interest and engagement, maybe your passion is high, and hopefully those remain high, but your expertise grows with time. And so the things that you're capable of doing really well are roles that might be repetitive, but they can be, I find them to be the things I reflect on even now about like what I love about research is sort of the rigor with which we gather data and assure its quality and assure its consistency. And I don't think I would have learned those things without living that experience through each stage as a researcher. And so the undergraduate experience is often peppered with those types of long tasks. And I think, many faculty in our department, and I think also in our college, and it's reflected here, I think, in this panel, do work hard though to involve students across, like I use the phrase life cycle of a research project. That's often a bulk of the hours, but then getting to a final product and getting to present your work is something that as an undergraduate you can also gain exposure in, and it helps to say that you're interested in that. I think faculty are often looking for input, from the student, like in what roles would you like to participate? Because I think we have the capacity to scale that participation so that you get good exposure to the different aspects of research without putting you in a position where you're maybe feeling less capable or competent or autonomous to make decisions and do work that reflects the quality that you want to put your name on. So I appreciate that Dixie and others have noted sort of that aspect of the undergraduate research experience. Okay, so I think I said that I would pass the mic then to Florencio. So if you would like to go ahead and respond.
Yeah, so like I had mentioned earlier, I'm part of the Epic Homes Indoor Environmental Quality Study, which is a study here in Fort Collins. And basically it's aimed at understanding the impacts of government incentivized energy efficiency retrofit program. So basically what it details is that participants, we go into participants' homes and we install five air quality instruments in 5 different locations around the home, and a energy use monitor that takes track of energy use of certain appliances around the home. And for my job specifically, I'm as a research assistant, I manage the home energy data. So using a program like R and GitHub and things like that, I manage the data, do data pre-processing, and then things like data analysis, data visualization, along with another student in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And that's the one I'm currently working on now. Before, I was working on a study in Bucaramanga, Colombia, also with Dr. Carter, and that one was that one dealt with managing black carbon and ultrafine particle concentration data, which is recorded by students at the university down there in Bucaramanga, Colombia. And also, as part of that job, I also gained a lot of skills in ArcMap and ArcGIS specifically, just so we can spatially analyze this data and create shape files that can be then used for land use regression modeling. And when I started off, in my first task with SURE was actually a Wisconsin-based study, focusing on the impacts of environmental stressors on early childhood health outcomes. And this study was the one that got me that experience in ArcMap and coding. I actually didn't have any coding experience until I started research. And yeah, it's been a really great process because I've in each study that I've done, I work with different people, and I've gotten all these interesting connections and many different skills from all of them.
Yeah, thank you, Florencio. It's a breadth of experience that you shared about. And obviously, I know a lot more about those than I do the others on the panel, but I'll refrain from commenting. I'd like to go ahead and let CJ offer a final response to this question, and then we'll move on from there. So.
Thank you. So, I had a variety of different experiences in undergraduate research. I think that the work that I did primarily centered around fieldwork, which, you're required to perform to a high degree, whether or not it's raining, snowing, it's hot, it's cold, you still need to take responsibility for what you're producing and under a whole new set of challenges than what the classroom usually presents. So I think that that's a really interesting takeaway from fieldwork and undergraduate research in general. I think that, like you said, the task can often be tedious and maybe not very glamorous, but you can definitely see how your simple tasks can have a large impact on a very important project that they're contributing to. So I think that that's very important. But I've also had the opportunity to develop a variety of connections to engineers, maybe at the city of Fort Collins or private firms in the city of Denver. I've also gotten to connect with other students and researchers within our own university and other institutions on the Front Range. So that's been positive. And my experiences have sort of helped inform maybe my questions that come up in class. When material is being delivered for the first time, I have something to base it off of already. I've already got questions brewing that may not have come up had I not had some real world experience to back that up. So I think that it has also had that effect, is just making me a more well-rounded student as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, CJ. I hope I'm not cutting you off. Was there anything more that you wanted to add? It was a little quick there.
I think that was pretty much everything. I can expound on anything if there is anything you'd like to hear more about.
Well, I think what I'll probably link to, and what I actually really appreciate that you sort of close out by noting that while we talk often about research expanding the opportunities that you have to see engineering and engineering research in practice, it also can be reinforcing of the things that we're learning in classes as we go through our undergraduate training. And so, just like you said, if you already have a prior real world context or field-based context, when you're learning a fundamental principle that's drawn from decades of data in that context, you might have questions that help advance your learning in a way that they maybe wouldn't have been advanced if you weren't already involved in research. And that's exciting to hear. I think where I want to pivot actually, and then this might be the last question that we have the opportunity to go around to everyone, is maybe shifting away a little bit from content and to that, how does your life as an undergraduate researcher mesh with your life as an undergraduate student? And I'm thinking about this probably most closely with respect to, what does your week to week balance of work look like? I imagine there's quite a bit of diversity here. Research projects are not, clocking in 4 hours every day. Some are, ones that I've had in the past are, but that's not the only way that they sort of are implemented. And so what I'd like your response to reflect is, how have you worked to integrate your life as a student in classwork with your life as a researcher? And, I would say to a maybe more brief degree, how that's affected your, overall, health and well-being. I think we don't have time for it to be a comprehensive response about how have you managed everything as a student, but in particular thinking about research and coursework and how you've managed your schedule. And of course that influences our, personal health and well-being. So if that, infuses the conversation, that's also totally on point. So I hope that question is guided enough. If you have a question for me, feel free to answer as I call on you. I'll go ahead and just I'll volunteer Roni first, unless actually, do you feel ready or would you like to pass? You're good?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Then go ahead and see if you have a response to share.
Yeah, so for me, like I said earlier, I haven't actually been able to work in the lab itself yet. I've just been looking at literature for my whole experience. So I haven't actually had to do much work, maybe like 2 to 4 hours of work weekly. So for me, it's been really manageable. But I imagine once I do start working in the lab, then it'll become more of a challenge to balance that with my school workload. But yeah, for me right now, it's actually not too bad.
I'm glad to hear that. Thanks, Ronnie. I'll go ahead and maybe see if there's volunteers for this one. Who would like to go next? You can.
I'd like to go next. If
Yeah,
that's
sure.
All right.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Dixie.
So I think, so I also work another part-time job at CSU in addition to my research internship. And I think the key to working in general while attending as a student is definitely communicating with everybody, and also being upfront with, for example, your research supervisor on, these are when my classes are. This is time I have set aside for my education. If education is your top priority before research efforts. But it's also being willing, and I think CJ alluded to this earlier, like if you're doing field work, it's being willing to put in the extra time. For example, if you're sampling for storm events, being willing to go out and make that time to make the field work happen if you're doing event-based research. And also, again, a communication. For example, with my other job, I have communicated that I do storm event-based sampling. So whenever they were setting up meetings, they would actually check the weather app before setting a scheduled meeting, just to keep that in mind. And I think that is one of the things that shines or stands out about CSU's culture, is that if you communicate your needs and also like how you're working and your other responsibilities, you can definitely manage your schedule well.
Thank you, Dixie. Yeah, I am so glad to hear you make that point. I think, being more on the receiving end of that communication, it makes my heart swell to know like that is something I love about the culture here. I think that we encourage students, we encourage ourselves to be open in communicating what we need to balance multiple moving parts, especially when most of us don't know each other's backstory or what else is going on the rest of your other 150 hours of the week. And I think that what many research projects are capable of doing is scaling that participation if a faculty member or a PI or a graduate student knows what your needs are going to be for the next couple of months, so that we can find ways to help people stay involved, because our lives are not so static that we have the same amount of time available each week. And I think that research is also, it's a long-term endeavor. We're invested in long-term goals and have visions for long-term impact, which can translate on the operational side into the opportunity to be flexible about some things, and then for deadlines that are less flexible, like event-based research or field campaigns. Not worked on event-based research, but campaigns that are sort of tied to a field seasonality. Then that's when we know we have to sort of all link arms together and make something work, because it's going to be hard for a spurt of time. So I definitely value that sense of collegiality that comes from communicating what you need and knowing what your partners in work need. So thank you for that. Who would like to go next? I'll take volunteers.
I'll go.
Thanks, CJ. That'd be great.
So yeah, just to kind of continue off of that, whenever research does extend into the school year, I've been lucky enough that the nature of my work keeps me most busy over the summer, but we do have a bit of involvement in the semester. And when that happens, teamwork is key. That's something that, we get a little bit of exposure to in the classroom working on projects and things, but a work atmosphere is a whole nother type of teamwork. And that's a bit more of a real experience that you'll take with you after you graduate. So I think that it can be hard at times, for sure. And if it's not hard enough juggling being an engineering student, but then you have this extra layer. So it really does, help teach discipline. It helps, prioritize and manage tasks. So those are just, some of the fringe benefits, I guess, that you get from doing this kind of job.
Yeah, I appreciated that myself when I was younger, and that there's about, like, when I add a few more things, it helps crystallize what I have time for and what I don't have time for. Of course, we want to avoid that period where now I have too many things to do. And so that's where that communication piece comes in. It's like, and I've appreciated students communicating to me their needs around exam schedules, for instance, being a pretty common one, but also just life in general. So things outside of the classroom, events come up in life. Certainly this last year has taught us that if we didn't understand that before. And I wanted to just pick up on the aspect of teamwork, I think is really critical for forming a faculty member's ability to speak about a student's skills. So if I'm asked to write a letter of recommendation for a student I've only had in class, I only have a pretty limited set of experiences with that student, and they may be phenomenal, and I can write a very positive and endorsing letter, but the examples that I have to draw from are more limited. I think when you have opportunities to work outside of the classroom, whether that's in research or elsewise, then when people who might be able to reference or be a reference for your future professional path, they have more experiences to draw on and reflect on. And I've certainly found that the more letters I've been writing, the more I value the opportunity to say, oh, I've worked with this person on multiple projects, and I've seen how they operate under stressful conditions and how they operate under, when they're really succeeding. I've seen how they wear success and failure, and those are, opportunities to shine. So I'm glad that you mentioned it. I wanted to just sort of piggyback on that a little bit. Who would like to go next? I want to make sure, I think we can answer this question within the time remaining, but I think, who's remaining? Connor.
Yeah, I can go.
Shaking your head if you don't, yeah, go
Sure.
ahead.
Yeah, I mean, kind of similar, very flexible outside of fieldwork. Fieldwork, needs to happen certain increments. And most of my, unlike I think some of the others, most of my, if not all of my work has been done during the school year, during the semester. But Dr. Baskar is an extremely flexible boss, which was fantastic. So, I mean, her policy was really, as long as things were getting done, I was making some type of measurable progress. She was okay if I worked all 20 hours a week or 2. And so I just kind of fit in an hour or 2 here or there between classes. So, if I had a 9 a.m. and 11 a.m., I'd go over to Scott, work for an hour, and then go to the next class or something like that. It's changed now with COVID, just there's been less work and things like that. But on that sort of normal schedule, yeah, that's how I'd manage it. And probably anywhere from 5 to 10 hours a week normally, maybe up to 15 if I had to do a collection trip down to Denver, but it was about the usual schedule.
Thanks. Yeah, and I also appreciate the details just on hours, so that students listening in can have a sense of scale. It can range, like you said, 2 to 20 is probably a good, probably hits the 1st to 99th percentile. Florencia or Albert, who would like to go?
I can go next.
Okay.
Or,
Albert,
yeah.
I'll let you go. I heard your voice. Sorry, that was my fault. I should have just passed the baton. Albert, how about you go?
Yeah, so just to describe the amount of time I dedicate to research, at least before the pandemic, it was very structured. So I would clock in at a certain time, clock out at a certain time, and I put that structure onto myself. So I'm thankful that my professor gave me that opportunity to set aside my own hours. Post-pandemic, it definitely gave me a lot more liability as to what I should do and how to go about my hours. And since then, it's ranged from 1 hour a week to 5 hours a week. And the general takeaway is that you kind of get what you put into the research. If you put in like a little bit of work, you're not going to get as much experience as you put in a lot of work. But at the same time, it's also important to balance everything else in your life and not just spread yourself too thin. Because while research is important, you're here because of academics, and if those aren't going well, in turn, your research isn't going to go well. So it's important to keep a balance with that. And also know that, and I think Dixie partnered on this earlier with communication, is that professors know that you're students and that academics is your priority. So as long as you communicate, I'm sure everything will be good.
Yeah, Thank you, Albert. That was a great, thoughtful response. We'll close out with Florencio, and then I'll say a few concluding remarks and see if there are any questions. So go ahead, Florencio, take your time.
Sure. I just want to say in advance that I think maintenance people just walked in, and so if you hear some power tools, I'm sorry.
No, no problem.
But I think when it comes to timing, I think once by my like second semester of research, I had realized that one thing beneficial is to treat sort of research as like another class or sort of a lab. So one thing that I started doing was whenever I was making my schedule for the semester, I would try to sort of use like that empty space that we often get in our classes and sort of say, oh, okay, this block is when I can use for my 2 or 3 hours of research for that day, and try to get like around 10 or more per week. And so that's been very beneficial because it's very structured, so I know when I'm doing research and when I don't, and it allows me to effectively communicate with the research team. So when I have a question on like a coding question or something, I know, or one of the professors that I work with can be like, oh, okay, this is around the time that he works. I'll fit it in and help him out around this time. So that's been very beneficial. And I think communication has also been a big thing. Us students are really busy, and so are the professors. So we know that sometimes we can't collaborate, or we'll miss this meeting, especially in COVID times where we're going from Zoom call to Zoom call. So communication has been really good, especially when, in my experience with Dr. Carter, it's she knows that, oh, this is the first round of midterms coming up, so there might not be something done, or I'm experiencing some issues in my code or something like that, and so this is what's causing less progress or something. So
yeah, thanks, Florencia. I'm glad to sort of hear you end on that note. I think one of the things that I really take a lot of delight from, and is a good way for me to also wrap up. This hour for me is such a joy. I love hearing from you all, and I hope the people that are able to listen in later can also sort of take stock of the diversity of experiences that were reflected, and know that as a faculty member, I can't speak for everybody in my department for sure, but of those that I know informally and those that have recommended you, we take a lot of delight in viewing this as a training opportunity as much as it is a job. So the beauty of working as a PI and faculty member is that you get to mentor students into a process that's often new to them. And so it's a space that's really forgiving and it's exploratory. It also does have deliverables and endpoints. So it's motivating in that regard, but it's also an opportunity to learn and experience like roadblocks and barriers, and learn how to communicate with your team members and learn how to acquire the skills that you need to overcome those. There's probably a lot more that all of you could say to our audience in terms of takeaways and things that you've enjoyed, and I sadly need to bring us to a close. But I think I'll turn it back over to Shannon with a huge thank you to all of you who participated in the panel. Your thoughtfulness and in response was awesome. I wish I could be there in person to say thank you, but thank you for joining.
Yes, thank you. It was wonderful. So much insight into what you guys do every day and all of the opportunities that are available to future students at CSU. So yes, thank you again. And thank you, Dr. Carter, for facilitating. It was wonderful. I will let everyone go with a have a great evening, and thank you again for joining. And our next session is at 3 o'clock and is a student panel.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Okay.
Shane. Thanks everyone for participating. I hope to eventually see you around in the buildings, and if not, wish you well in your next step in your journey.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.